Hey guys, what's going on? So today I wanted to talk about wiring on the 96 Lumina. I've made some progress. We'll go over that in this video, as well as the wiring. The most important thing to do on these Luminas, in my opinion, that I just started doing, and what I should have been doing in the past. I've been kind of, well, being thankful that I haven't had a problem so far, but I wanted to make sure this time around, especially on a car this nice underneath, and everything this competitive of a car, that we're not going to have issues with this particular connector. So I've been moving the wiring, guys. Obviously, you guys can see I've got this entire area cleared. This is where the PCM and the fuse block used to sit, and that's now going to be basically all the way back there and going to be in a very safe position. This fuse block is going to sit somewhere around the ABS unit here. That's going to be very safe. It's not going to get hit. But really, the topic of this video, I think the most important thing is addressing this connector right here. This is a very important connector, and this connector used to sit right here in this hole. And you guys can see if this engine gets hit or knocked in the right position, this alternator will hit that connector. So it's very important that we move that connector there. So first thing you're going to want to do is you're probably going to want to disconnect the connector here, and you're going to take compressed air or something of that nature. I used brake clean, turned the can upside down so I got some air out of it as well, and also sprayed a little bit of brake clean in there. You don't want too much, and sprayed out that hole there. And you guys can see there, if my camera would focus, unfortunately it doesn't look like it's going to, that's not a hex head. That is a what you'd call a Torx bolt, or a Torx screw, or a star bit, whatever you want to call it. And you're going to use a T30. That's what the size is originally. If that doesn't fit very well in yours, try a different size up or down. Generally down is going to end up causing it to strip. Generally T30, or when you're dealing with those Torx bits, you're going to want to use the exact size that it was, or if a little bit bigger in case it's rusted out a little bit. Even if you have to use the smaller size just to wiggle back and forth just to get that initial surface rust out of the T30 and make that a T30 again. That's just the way you have to deal with rust. It is what it is. So as long as you're able to disconnect that connector, get it to separate, bring the harness back, cut the cowl. Cut all this piece of the cowl away. You could cut the whole thing if you want to. I might end up doing that as well. Not sure on that yet. But I cut cowl all the way about to the first set of coil packs. And then I cut this area. And you'll see a dish here that was initially just for the air to get in, obviously, but also to stop the water from getting in here. Basically, you're going to want to take that all out. That is just glued. The metal piece is just glued to the firewall. You guys can see the glue here. So you're going to take a pry bar and peel up on it if you can, and once it breaks free, just basically grab it and yank it out of there. Next step is you're going to want to take out the recirculation door area. There's a little box here. It goes, essentially, this will be an open slot, and you'll see the blend door flapper, or the recirculation door flapper, is right here. And that's usually where I feed my gas lines and battery lines on most, or battery cables on most of my derby cars. But this year I've taken that all out, and well, I'm still going to be running that type of stuff through here. It's just going to be a lot more room and a lot more safe for them to run through here now. And you're going to end up taking out the blower motor. That's a 7mm, 3 of them, and 1 connector. Pretty simple to take out. It's pretty tight clearances on one of the screws, but not too bad. And you're going to go inside the car, and you're going to want to pop the wiring out of this connector, which is going to be sitting way in there. You're not going to be able to get to this one. You're not going to be able to get to this little clip here, but you're going to be able to get to this one, and this last one. That's going to sit all the way in there, and that's what you're going to want to use just to get that out of there. And after that, you're going to take that same pry bar you took, maybe, or a screwdriver. You're going to stick it down in here. There's a little rectangle sitting in here, basically, like through here. And you can get in between and pry it out. And right here is it. For me, or at least, well, half of it. And you guys can see where I was prying on it. And I pried it back through. And you can actually then get to the back side of that connector. Now, I chose to take that entire thing out of there. It was just, I just simply broke where it was attached and took it out. I threw it off to the side. Then, I took that connector, popped it off from the front. It's retained from the front. You just pull on 2 tabs on either side. You just push down, and then it pops into the dash there. And you pull it out, you yank it out from the side where that wiring was that I showed you just a minute ago where it was retained. And you pop it out of its connector. You shove it up where the blower motor was. You guys can see the wiring coming up through there. And then the bottom of this connector, if I can get to it, I don't think I can get to it without blocking the view. The bottom of that connector will end up there. And you simply just put the connector back together. You can even yank it all the way up to here and connect it and then shove it back down in there. I think that's the safest place for this to be. And you're gonna make sure you're not gonna tie that down. The worst thing to do on derby cars, in my opinion, as far as wiring, one of the worst things to do is to tie everything down super tight. And the reason why I say that is because if this motor decides it wants to flop this way, that way, this way, that way, you're going to have a problem if your wiring is super tight. Because here's the difference between loose wiring like this. See how that wiring has movement? If that wiring was super stiff and only moved with the motor, and moved hard with the motor, I should say, that's going to end up ripping some of those wires out. And guess what that wiring goes to? Your coil packs. So this having wiring here, or having movement, you guys can see I got movement. That's fine. You're not going to want to tie that down super tight. You actually can see I've taken it out of its factory clips here that held it down to the motor. Now, that is a very important tip in Demolition Derby. You're not going to want to tie down things super tight. Now, obviously, this going backwards is really not going to affect it. It's going to be probably just fine to go backwards. Now, forwards, if it comes all the way over here, well, then you're probably going to have a problem. Although this wiring can all move here. And it may tug on that thing, and you know what? What it's going to do? It's going to pull that possibly all the way out. And if it pulls it all the way out, that's fine. It's still in this channel, which is okay as long as it's not pulling on your battery cables and your fuel lines, most importantly those fuel lines. But like I said, slack is your best friend, in my opinion. But also sharp edges are not good. You're going to want to make sure your wires are very well protected with loom, so that way if it's rubbing on a sharp edge like this, or put something on that sharp edge to stop it from rubbing through that wiring, because obviously in the derby everything's going to be flopping around a lot. You're not going to want that wiring getting rubbed through and then shorting a power to ground, or blowing any more fuses than you have to, or blowing any important fuses, I should say. And you're going to have the computer coming through here, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But that's basically how to move that. Once you do that, you can tuck all this over here, and you're going to be left with the PCM connector sitting somewhere in this area. Now, obviously, the PCM of this car is freaking huge. It's a huge PCM. Here's the problem. You can't fit that big of a PCM in this little area right here. I wish I could, because if I could, that's where I'd leave it. That's just a fine location. Yeah, if this car gets hit really hard right here, yes, that is going to start to come in, but that's not going to collapse all the way. More than likely, you're going to have more serious issues that's collapsing that much. So, the best thing to do is to also leave it a little bit of slack, but maybe put a piece of foam over it. That way, if it does go flopping back and forth a little bit in there, it's not going to get too hurt. Just like that foam is a perfect example right there, like that kind of foam. But back to what I was saying, you're gonna be left with that PCM there. Obviously that's not gonna work with that big of a PCM. So you guys can see this right here, these are the PCM connectors. So what I did is I cut the dashboard right here and right here, and I cut the HVAC vent right here. I might end up moving this module right here. This is actually, I believe, your theft deterrent module, so that's a very important module right there. You're gonna wanna take your plasma cutter, preferably, or a hole saw, obviously a metal hole saw, and you're going to cut a hole in the firewall right there, through and through. There's 2 layers of metal, as you guys can see, and put your wiring right through that hole. Now, unfortunately, the only thing that's unfortunate is that there's not much room here for this wiring to sit, but there's just enough for that computer just to sit right here, and you're going to want to put something over it like this to stop that computer from being in direct sunlight, because direct sunlight isn't the greatest thing for a computer. But you're going to want to put something over it, whether it's a piece of foam, whether it's something of that nature. These are technically weather resistant or rain resistant connectors there. So you're going to have that on the dashboard. Very, very safe place. It ain't going to get hurt unless it starts flopping around, and you don't want that to flop around. That is pretty important for that not to flop around. So that's basically what I've done on this car, and I'm very happy with the results so far. I'm very pleased. And so that's basically what I've changed about the wiring on this Lumina. Everything else is relatively the same. The front wiring here is almost identical to my old Luminas, and this is just fine. This should not get hurt. You have the only concern about all this wiring is right here to your starter. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap that in more loom and hope that it doesn't get hit, because there's not terribly much you can do about that. I already tried to move this wire down, and well, I started to hurt the starter. So we decided, because you guys can see quite a rusty starter there, not gonna mess with it. I'd rather not need a new starter. So we're just gonna leave it the way it is. We'll wrap it up in tape, we'll wrap it up with loom, and it should be okay. Because if you look here, as long as you tuck that in close to the starter, it's gonna be lined up, if not a little bit tucked in before the exhaust. You have this sticking out, you have this sticking out, you have your transmission lines actually sticking out quite a bit further. I'm going to end up cutting these back a little bit more, so that way it's a lot more compact. I'm going to tuck it in towards the starter. That way it's not so exposed. But I've never had an issue with the Lumina cutting anything through this area. Now, down lower, yes, because of this lower core support is going to probably come in somewhere around this area. If you're unlucky enough, it will split and go up, but I've never seen that happen before. But it's just very important that you get the main wiring harness here just tucked in and under here, because part of that is that's your crank signal. So at least one of them. This goes to your crankshaft balancer right there. You guys can actually see where that wiring goes in right there. So just be careful on that. And this fuse block on this side is just going to get tucked in right next to the ABS unit. Very safe. I think I already addressed that before. So this wiring is all the same. Not very complicated on these Luminas to move wiring. I've gotten a lot better at it as the years have gone on. As for the rest of the Lumina, as you guys can see, the glass is out. I still have no front bumper on it. I'm just going to use the Ford Freestyle bumper once again. Just put a radiator back in this thing. I'm not going to be looping the lines in this 3100. It seems to hold coolant just fine. The interior is all stripped. I got the center console back in. The seat, obviously, I might have to put that passenger seat back in. I got to talk to the promoter sometime soon here to see if I have to run that front seat, because if I don't have to run that passenger seat, well then I'm not going to run the passenger seat, just because my battery box and that passenger seat are very close to each other, because I'm not a very tall individual for me to lean over there. I don't have very long arms, so getting in there is not the easiest of things to do. I know a lot of guys just say cut a hole out of your seat and just put the battery in the seat. Well, maybe, but I don't know. I really like them hooked the way I have them. So anyway, guys, that's basically it. This seat obviously is not staying in. But the trunk is essentially the same as when you guys last saw it. Everything else is basically the same. I'm very happy with the progress I made on this car. And so stay tuned. We should be I should be able to finish the wiring for the most part today. And so stay tuned for more updates, hopefully coming soon on the 96 Lumina. Hopefully we can even get started a little bit on the 96 Buick Regal. The other one I have sitting out in the backyard, as you guys have seen, the one that I said which one should be Derby first. This car ended up winning the poll, but which I kind of had a feeling it would. But that car will also start to have work done on it, just that way, in case for whatever reason I do have time to run 2 cars this year, that can be the case. So stay tuned, like, comment, subscribe. I'm sorry if this was kind of a boring video talking about wiring. I know it can be kind of dry, but it's a very important, and I have not seen it on YouTube on how exactly to move that connector. Relatively simple, but I was lost when I first started because I had no idea how I was going to get to that connector. So on the back side anyway, front side pretty straightforward. So stay tuned, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you guys for watching. Bye bye everybody.